Can you tell me a little bit about the statement?
I'm not going to talk for you now.
Why not?
Outlook, another in a weekly series of in-depth reports on issues and news events of interest to the South Florida community.
I'm tending to my business. Get out of the way now. Leave me alone.
Mr. Allen, can you tell me a little bit about...
Don't be holding on to him or grabbing me.
I have no idea. Why, you were grabbing me.
Well, don't be pushing me around.
Tonight, Never Say 30, a pictorial report on television journalism as experienced by a WCKT news film reporter working within the spirit of the American Bill of Rights. Your commentator, Don Fairlie.
Good evening. The number 30 is the traditional journalistic symbol for ending a story. But in this age of electronic journalism, it is not unusual for a news story to catch up with its past. With the invention of the orthicon tube, television added to journalism by giving sight and sound to the written word. Today, independent surveys indicate that a vast majority of Americans view television as their most reliable source of news and opinion. And the reason for this is the television field reporter, the man who applies the miracles of electronics to basic news principles that directly protect the people's right to know under the American Constitution. In a moment, the story of a news film reporter, the backbone of the sometimes dangerous world of electronic journalism, who never says 30. In his 8 years with WCKT News, reporter Ben Silver has witnessed more major news events than can be covered in this report. Among them, the stories of America's first integration crisis, the first U.S. satellite launch, and the first commercial jet flight. His assignments have taken him from every section of the United States to the Chinese border town of Alma Ata in the Soviet Union. He has photographed riots, revolutions, and disasters. Ben Silver has interviewed presidents, ambassadors, governors, cabinet ministers, scientists, and killers. But whether the story involves a ribbon cutting or a rebellion, Ben Silver, like his WCKT colleagues, records the event in words and pictures with an unfailing eye for what is important. In 1957, he was initiated at Little Rock, Arkansas.
Although the Little Rock story was national in scope, WCKT News had a special reason for making the trip. Miami schools has not yet been integrated, but South Florida knew it was coming. It was my assignment to find the answers to questions that would soon have to be answered in Miami. Later, at Cape Canaveral, America was attempting to orbit its first satellite. Newsmen had no special privileges, so we watched and waited on the beach with everyone else, miles from the launch pad. Finally, after days of waiting, the launch was attempted, but it failed. A news film reporter is like a doctor. He's on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. News recognizes no time barriers. When a Braniff airliner crashed in 1958, the call came late at night. I was among the first to reach the scene, among the last to leave. It was not the first time I had witnessed death, but you never get used to death. You see the relatives of the victims, and you forget the long hours. A reporter meets a lot of killers in this business. I'm convinced there is no such thing as the criminal type. Norman Makowitz had a nice personality, and you couldn't help liking him. But Makowitz murdered a police officer and had a long criminal record.
If you had your life to lead over, would there be any changes?
A lot of changes, yeah.
In what respect?
Well, I'd do like everyone else out there. Job, home, family.
The war between the news media and the legal profession's judicial canons has plagued news film reporters, barring them from courtrooms, and TV newsmen deal in pictures. In November 1957, accused rapist Howard Picott went to trial. Presiding Circuit Judge Vincent Giblin sought to extend the no pictures rule to the public corridors outside the courtroom. Instructed to get the story, reporter Ben Silver put to the test the jurist's unprecedented ruling. Silver was held in contempt of court. He was fined. It was never paid unless you consider the ruling a bitter setback to journalistic freedom. For Ben Silver, there have been other memorable scrapes with the judiciary including an unexpected attack as he attempted to film a jurist outside his chambers. But on another occasion, Circuit Judge William Herron, about to sentence cop killer Norman Makowitz to the electric chair, had his life threatened. Reporter Ben Silver recalled hearing a man making behind-the-scenes threats. He lured the suspect to a prearranged rendezvous, allegedly to get his story, and alerted the state's attorney's office. The suspect was arrested. The threats ended. State Attorney Richard Gerstein has occasion to cope with reporter Ben Silver's determination in pursuing a news story.
Ben never takes no for an answer. He actually thinks that he could do a better job being the state attorney than I could, and probably that's one of the reasons why he makes a good newsman. He probably thinks he could do a better job being a public official in any capacity than most of the elected public officials. But as I said, that's one of the reasons why he's effective in his job.
In 1958, newsman Silver flew to Havana to cover Fidel Castro's announced attack on the island's capital city. The rebel stronghold, however, was in Santiago, 600 miles away. Silver filmed the burning of sugar fields along the way. Arriving in Santiago, Batista police promptly threw him in jail.
My first taste of the Fort Moncada jail was unappetizing. 24 people, all political prisoners, were crowded into 2 rooms. We drank out of the same drinking cup, one that couldn't be washed. Being an American, I was given the only mattress. It was filthy and full of bugs. I offered it to a woman in the next room, but she wasn't permitted to accept. The treatment varied. One of the guards was pleasant, but another delighted in putting a gun to my head and pulling the trigger. Fortunately, it was not loaded. I was finally released to the American Embassy, where these scenes were filmed. I never received a clear explanation of why I was held. The American ambassador then was Earl E.T. Smith of Palm Beach.
Word of Ben Silver's arrest came to me in the American Embassy in April 1958. This was just the time when the Castro Communist Revolution was beginning to take effect and was getting to its height. Silver bypassed the American Embassy, as most hot newspaper men did who wanted to get a story, because they knew if they got to the American Embassy, we would not permit them or let them go out into the field of operations, which was in the eastern end of Cuba. Silver was arrested in Oriente Province and spent 3 nights in jail in Oriente, and I believe 1 night in jail in Cabana Fortress in Havana. Ben Silver was on his way for an interview with Fidel Castro. It was a dangerous assignment because the government of Cuba people were liable to give anybody real rough treatment unless they knew who they were.
A few months later, I was back in Havana. Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista was holding elections to prove he wasn't really a dictator. The real proof came when you pressed for a story and found a machine gun muzzle pressed on your throat. A few weeks after these films were shot, I was tucked in bed back in Miami after celebrating the New Year when the phone rang again. Batista had pulled out and street fighting had engulfed Havana. All commercial flights were canceled, so we had to charter a plane. Shots rang out as we drove into downtown Havana. The further we drove, the more intense the fighting became. A life photographer and I went to the top floor of a Sevilla Biltmore hotel where we had some protection and could get a good view of the fighting. A reporter is not immune to fear. I poked my camera out of a window, got some film, and ducked. That is, until I heard shells ricochet off the windowsill. I dropped to the floor, crawled out of the room, and just sat there. I tried to phone Miami, but it was impossible to get through. When the shooting subsided, I learned that the Cubans were firing at our window because they thought our cameras were guns. We worked without food because there was a general strike. As night fell, it still wasn't clear who was in control, but it was clear that I was hungry. When the rebels marched into Havana, it became a television war. They paraded on cue. It became increasingly difficult to determine whether Castro or television was in control. As the mob surged towards Castro, it was time to wonder about the kind of leader he would make. At the first of many public trials of Batista supporters in Havana's Sports Palace, we had ample warning of the future. One military judge said the defendant, Major Jesus Sosa Blanca, was guilty of atrocities. You asked yourself, if Castro could prejudge an enemy, would the Cubans have the freedom they were promised?
Not long after Castro's victory, Camilo Cienfuegos, a Confederate whose image was second only to Fidel's, disappeared. Some said he was killed, others held he had fled the island following an ideological dispute. Newsmen combed Latin America for the missing Cienfuegos. Ben Silver followed a tip that led through the back streets of Merida and the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. After 4 days of chasing shadows and fruitless leads, the story gave out. In a moment, the adventures of WCKT newsman Ben Silver in Russia. But first, this message. The man on the right is newsman Ben Silver. The man on the left is former Soviet chairman Nikita Khrushchev. The place, the Kremlin in Moscow, and Ben Silver was there with WCKT news commentator Wayne Ferris and a group of U.S. governors led by Florida's Governor Leroy Collins on a 25,000-mile tour of the Soviet Union. When WCKT News learned of the audience, we asked our wire service to transmit a picture. When it cleared, we had a picture of newsman Silver shaking hands with Chairman Khrushchev. It was a coup for Silver, for Khrushchev, the beginning of the end.
The meeting was supposed to be a private session with the governors. Wayne and I were there for a brief picture-taking ceremony. But as we were being escorted out, Khrushchev pointed to me and in English asked who I was. Governor Collins introduced us. It was a costly introduction. I was barely able to film the end of the premier's handshake with Wayne. We spent a busy 30 days in the Soviet Union. We went from Moscow to Leningrad, to Tbilisi, to Alma Ata, to Samarkand, and to Kiev. Samarkand, until now, had been closed to foreigners. Alma Ata was on the Red Chinese border. My assignment was to cover Wayne Ferris and Governor Collins. Most of the time was spent talking with Soviet officials, on quickie tours of various cities and attending official functions. Much of the important information was gleaned when you had time to yourself. There was a Russian professor who criticized communism, black marketeers willing to trade rubles for dollars far above the official exchange rate. On one Sunday, Governor Collins junked the official agenda to attend church. We found that years of communism had failed to wash the religious heritage of the people. We were surprised at the difference in culture and conditions from one republic to another. Samarkand had not changed much from biblical times. Getting our story out of Russia wasn't easy. Wayne waited hours for a censor to clear his copy. Our film had to be submitted to the authorities. This could take weeks. We found a way out. Our film left Russia with a governor, an American space expert, and Averill Harriman. Since we were a VIP group, I experienced little trouble taking film. On a side trip to Dubna, I filmed the largest cyclotron in the world. Ironically, they allowed us to film the cyclotron, but refused to let us photograph the outside of the building. It seems that the walls had developed cracks. The paradox in Dubna and elsewhere in Russia was apparent. The Russians didn't seem to have any trouble building a highly complex piece of machinery, but the workmanship on low-priority items was crude. Although he could only speak a few words of Russian, Governor Collins had little trouble establishing rapport with the people.
I never will forget the time we were in Russia together. Back in 1959, some of you may remember that I headed a delegation of governors, and we went over to visit in the Soviet Union, and WCKT volunteered, and I think it was a most generous thing for them to do, to send a news team over there to cover this trip of the governors. So Wayne Ferris and Ben Silver were assigned to do this job. Well, we wanted to cooperate and help them, and we tried to get transportation for them from place to place in Russia, but the Russians just simply wouldn't cooperate. They said, we'll get you around, you governors, but we're not going to get any cameramen or any newsmen around. But, you know, every time we went to a place, there, when we arrived at the airport, was Ben Silver and Wayne Farris. And Ben always had that camera, and he was right on top of that story. He's a wonderful man. I've enjoyed knowing him in Miami. I've enjoyed being with him from time to time. Television is tremendously important in bringing people the news of what's happening in their world. Television really amounts to the eyes and the ears of the people. Because if you didn't have that cameraman out there getting the story and bringing it to you, you simply wouldn't know a lot about what's going on. But as important as these machines of television are, they really amount to nothing unless you've got the man behind the machines. And Ben Silver he typifies the very best in the man behind the machine to get you the news of exactly of what's happening in this world that's important to you.
March 10th, some 300...
In search of a story, I've been kicked out of many places. A few years ago, I became persona non grata at the Jewish Cultural Center on Miami Beach. Their speaker, Scott Nearing, is a professed communist. But there was a bigger prize in the audience, the editor of the Communist Worker, Louis Weinstock. I photographed the action from the outside and waited for Weinstock to leave. He ran out and I followed. Someone tried to trip me. A federal agent came to my aid. But Weinstock kept moving right on out of town. Nearing returned to Miami a few months ago and momentarily agreed to an interview.
That have been listed on the Attorney
Now,
General's
wait a minute.
subversive list.
This is not a congressional hearing. I am not answering questions of that type. I am a social scientist. I came here to make a talk on a particular subject in the field of political science. I am not here to be inquired into by you or anybody else.
Now, you want to discuss your political philosophy at all?
I do not wish to discuss my political philosophy with you. I came here tonight to make a speech. If you want to come into the room and listen to this speech, you're perfectly welcome to do so.
Interviewing people who make news is routine in a reporter's workday. Many close personal relationships develop between a newsman and the people who make the news. But there are times when a reporter's presence is unwelcome, his inquiries uncomfortable. Governor Ferris Bryant, for instance, found newsman Silver on a plane with him en route to California. Bryant was going there to talk with directors of Aerojet, a jet engine manufacturer, and Bryant didn't want the trip publicized. But before the flight was over, the governor and the reporter were relaxing and playing gin rummy together. Bryant's successor, Governor Hayden Burns, also had a traveling companion, the name Ben Silver. The place, Nassau, where Burns had gone to scotch a story that he had a secret bank account there. Ben Silver is no stranger to the British Islands. On another occasion, he photographed Prince Philip, the husband of Britain's Queen Elizabeth. Sometimes a reporter suffers a technical knockout. After much trying, reporter Silver convinced former President Harry Truman to sit for an interview. But his sound camera refused to work. "Try again," said Truman. Ben tried again, but with no more success. "I'm sorry, son," said the peppery elder statesman.
Of all the people I've met, President Truman impressed me most. When he said, "I'm sorry," you could tell he really meant it. He has a genuine, sincere quality few others possess. Adlai Stevenson was the most eloquent. He would not tolerate obviously ill-informed newsmen. I recall a radio interviewer asking him, "How about Russia?" Stevenson responded, "Well, how about it?" John F. Kennedy was the most fascinating. He could laugh at himself and look better than a Hollywood-created president. I was assigned to him when he flew to Palm Beach after his father suffered a stroke, when he spoke to the Bay of Pigs prisoners at the Orange Bowl, and in Bal Harbor a few days before the assassination. In 1960, Lyndon Johnson arrived in Miami. He was running for vice president then. I managed to secure an interview with him, agreeing that certain areas of controversy would be bypassed. There was a huge crowd at the airport with everyone pushing and shoving. By the time Mr. Johnson appeared before the camera, I had forgotten about the agreement.
It's one of the most delightful and one of the most productive days that I've ever spent. Senator Smathers has been traveling to the south with me, and we started the day this morning in Jacksonville. We had a wonderful lunch at Orlando. We had one of the most rousing welcomes I've received anywhere on the trip at Tampa, and I feel real confident that Senator Kennedy is going to carry Florida come November.
You saw Senator Holland today. Did he say he would give you his support? You don't want that.
Newspaper and television reporters are natural competitors. The press has made journalistic history. Television is making it. But a good newsman in any media earns his spurs the hard way. We asked Clark Ash, associate editor of the Miami News, about Ben Silver, television reporter.
Someday I want to ask Ben Silver how he manages to stay so happy. You know, a reporter doesn't always have the most pleasant job in the world, and especially a television reporter with his cameras and other equipment. And I've seen Ben operate under some fairly exasperating circumstances. But I don't believe I've ever seen him lose that happy disposition. Come to think of it, he may be giving reporters a new image.
Reporter Ben Silver has been physically assaulted, even shot at. But he's one of a few to be attacked by a clergyman. It seems that the young daughter of a Havana cantor was robbed of some $15,000 she had successfully smuggled out of Cuba. Ben tried to film the girl and her father. The cantor grabbed Ben from behind and held him in an unliturgical half-Nelson while his daughter smashed Ben's camera on the sidewalk. The story moved into court but didn't end there. The girl apologized and paid for the destroyed camera. But when she married, soon after, Ben Silver was invited to the wedding. The young lady had a temper, and Ben may well have been the best man there. There is little room for a specialist in television reporting. For instance, WCKT news film reporter Ben Silver has been called upon to shoot a fire from a hovering helicopter. This is tricky photography and dangerous. Hurricanes are something else. A multitude of difficulties dog a reporter's every step as he tries to capture the full impact of a howling, brutal storm. Ben Silver has filmed several major hurricanes during his career. Danger to a newsman can come at unexpected times and in unlikely places. When the Bay of Pigs invaders returned to Miami, it was an occasion for joyful weeping and great back-bruising abrazos. But where Ben stood, a fistfight broke out, and when he tried to photograph it, the combatants turned on him. He had to be rescued from being thrown out of Dinner Key Auditorium. On this occasion, newsman Silver was covering American pacifists picketing the Cuban Revolutionary Council. A riot broke out, police rushed in to quell the melee, and Ben came away with some spectacular film, although stunned by a rock. Aside from being a spot news reporter, cameraman, sound technician, lighting expert, and general daredevil, a television reporter must be an expert in government and politics with the ability to slice through rhetoric to the heart of a complex matter.
It's been more than 2 months now since County Manager Irving McNair was fired. The Dade County Commission today sat down for the second time to try and decide on his successor.
County Mayor Chuck Hall announced that 45 have applied for the $30,000 a year job. Acting County Manager Hoke Welch has not applied, but is very much in the running, and the longer it takes to find a manager, the more his stock goes up. The commission failed to agree on how many commissioners should support the new manager, if and when he's found, or whether he should come from government or industry.
While the commissioners agreed on very little, they did agree that the man who fills McNair's shoes will have a tough time of it. This is Ben Silver at the County Commission.
Miami Law Review publisher Lee Ruich was formerly vice president and general manager of WTVJ television station. He kept a book on the competition.
Ben Silver is one of those rare individuals who helped pioneer TV news. The word radio's most effective means of mass communication. As a former competitor, I remember hearing TV cameramen cuss them and praise them almost in the same breath. Ben has the ability to probe, ask searching, sometimes embarrassing questions, but he always gets the story. I remember that a competitive cameraman complained that Ben appeared late at a news story. The fact that Ben obtrusively set up his camera in direct line between the speaker and the other cameraman didn't seem to bother Ben. Hence, he was sometimes unpopular among other TV cameramen. But because of his aggressiveness, he was always very much respected by them, too. One might say that Ben is now the dean of South Florida broadcasters. The concept of a news reporting team demands that he be a technician and a newsman. Ben has the unusual gift or talent of being able to visualize a story as he shoots it. This is essential in TV, where the camera must capture the meaning of the story. I've known Ben Silver for a good many years and salute him as a veteran among the new breed of reporters.
In a moment, the outlook for Never Say 30. A great quantity of indigestible nonsense has been perpetrated about the reporter and his profession. Actually, the professional journalist puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like everyone else. What makes him stand out from the rest of society is the public nature of his job. Other men pursue their private, separate interests. The reporter deals with people, events, and controversies that affect us all. He functions as a combination town crier and public advocate, a sort of journalistic Paul Revere, whose freedom to defend stands as a guarantee of liberty to the American people. For it is only through knowledge that man can reject those who would deny or abridge his freedoms. John Peter Zenger's libel trial in 1735 was a major step in the fight for freedom of the press. In 1965, television journalists, aided by the power of immediacy, are the anchor of the principles of American freedoms, which Thomas Jefferson said formed the bright constellation which has gone before us and guided our steps through an age of revolution and reformation. The Ben Silvers are examples of what is expected of the new breed of reporter. He has successfully applied the traditions and principles of journalism to the new mass media of broadcasting. Ben Silver is not typical of the television reporter because he is ahead of most, but he is typical of the WCKT news film reporter who must capture a story in pictures as well as words, be capable of covering every kind of story with equal skill, and follow the true newsman's basic instincts, which has made WCKT television's highest honored news station because its news staff has learned to never say 30. This is Don Fairlie for Outlook. Good night.
Was the verdict what you expected?
Dick, I'll see you tomorrow over in the jail, okay? Oh, right.
Is it all right if Dick talks to me for a second?
I'd rather not that.
Dick, was that what you expected?
I'm sorry, I can't say.
Were you guilty? You never took the stand.
You've been watching Never Say 30 on Outlook, a weekly presentation of WCKT News. Next Sunday at 6:30, Outlook presents another program of interest to the South Florida community. This program was pre-recorded. Stay tuned now for Florida Forum.